The tulip poplar is known for its height and resilience, a tree that withstands storms because of its deep roots beneath the surface. But even the strongest structures depend on what's happening below ground. In Maryland, those foundations matter more than ever. 1 in 5 adults lives with a serious mental health condition, and among young people, the numbers are even more concerning. Today, as part of our Podcasthon charity drive, we're highlighting the work of NAMI-Maryland and talking about how community, advocacy, and policy help build stronger roots for mental health across the state. If this conversation resonates, we invite you to share this episode with friends and family and consider supporting NAMI. I'm Mike Doherty, and you're listening to Cracking the Shell on Psychological Science.
Cracking the shell on the mic, psychological science in sight. Abby bringing that fire sparks when she speaks, ignition on sight. Been with the breakdown, mind state takedown, never miss the details. Mike hitting concepts heavy like freight trains on steel rails. Joey steady mapping brainwaves, decoding how we feel. They turn that abstract real. Yeah, the knowledge is real. They peel it back slow, layer after layer. Mind so deep, yeah, we ride that elevator.
Welcome back to Cracking the Shell on Psychological Science. I'm Joey Barnett, and I'm here with my co-host, Mike Doherty. And today, we've got a really special episode as part of our Podcasthon charity drive. Joining us is Michael Gray, longtime healthcare policy advocate and former deputy director of the Maryland chapter of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or as most of us know it, NAMI-Maryland. Michael, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Joey. I'm really excited to be here and really grateful for the chance to talk to you and Mike about NAMI-Maryland and mental health advocacy more broadly.
It's great to have you here. So before we dive in, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe about your firm, Tulip Affair Strategies?
Sure. So after serving as deputy director of NAMI-Maryland, I launched my company, Tulip Affair Strategies, last year, which is a healthcare policy and advocacy consulting firm. Today, I work with organizations to help them navigate complex policy environments, build coalitions, and move their initiatives forward, mostly in the behavioral health space. My time at NAMI-Maryland really shaped how I think about system-level change and what it takes to make a real durable policy impact.
So Tulip Affair is the scientific name for the tulip poplar. That's not a common company name, so why did you name it that?
Yeah, it is a bit different, and it's hard to pronounce and spell, as people, consultants who are smarter than me have tried to tell me. But I'm sticking with that name, and I appreciate you bringing it up because it's the state tree of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. If you can't hear it in my accent, I'm a native of Kentucky and lived there for 35 years before moving east. And when I was a kid in a very modest home on a small lot, that small lot was dominated front and backyard by 3 old-growth tulip poplars. So that's part of my kind of positive memories of childhood, but also they're all over Maryland, just like the Maryland white oak, the state tree of this state, all over the hinterlands of Maryland, western Maryland. Whenever you go on a hike, you're going to see those trees.
You've spent a better part of your career in mental health advocacy. Not everyone chooses a career in this area. So what drew you into this space personally? Was there a particular moment or experience that made this work feel personal to you?
Yeah, Mike, I appreciate the question because everyone I know who works in the mental health policy world has a story that got them into this work. And for me, it's when I was almost through law school, I encountered a family who was dealing with 2 individuals that had serious mental illness diagnoses, one with schizophrenia and one person living with bipolar disorder. And it's just luck of the draw. We don't choose to have mental health conditions. They're involuntary by nature. And seeing how ineffective the mental health care delivery system is in this country at the state and local level, nationwide. Some people say it's a broken system, but something has to be whole in order to become broken. We've never really had a system in place for this, and I learned all that very quickly trying to help this family, and it was clear to me there's work to be done, and that's how I got in this work.
I believe you have a philosophy background, so I'm going to pull out a philosophy quote from Nietzsche. Nietzsche said, he who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow. And I'm, just listening to your career path, I'm just curious, what the why was for you that made this work, the work that you do, worth the challenges.
Well, thank you. That's a great reference. And like anyone who does the kind of advocacy and lobbying side, I'm not on the front lines. I'm trying to fix policy. So to quote the 1990s philosopher Dave Matthews, I'm no Superman. See it, Nietzsche and Dave Matthews.
There you go.
Anyway, but it is a great question. And yeah, if you have that why, that drive, that's what you see all over the mental health policy and advocacy world, are people from all different professions and academic backgrounds who see the problems and get passionate about fixing them. So yes, that is the why. And once you have that why, you work with policymakers and advocates to figure out the how.
You once wrote that mental health care could be a casualty of the political climate. 7 years later, has hyperpartisanship made mental health a purple issue, something that both parties care about, or is it still getting sidelined?
Well, I would say it's no longer sidelined the way it was then. But when I wrote that was in a Kentucky newspaper, I think, like you said, 7 years ago, and that was a time when the national stage and the state level in Kentucky had some similarities. That was early on in President Trump's first term in office, and he was having some getting to know you growing pains with people in his own party on Capitol Hill. And then in Kentucky, there was a Republican governor named Matt Bevin, who I think was the second Republican in like 40 years in that state. But he was dealing with Republicans who had taken over state legislature for the first time in 95 years in Kentucky. And again, you think, okay, same party, they're going to get together, be lockstep on all the issues. Not so much. And they were infighting over things that were distracting from what I felt were the more important, frankly, issues of mental health policy and how to fix this messed up delivery system for mental health care we have in this country, state, local, federal level. And now it's not as much on the back burner as it was then. But we still have two issues. One, there's still so much fighting over everything else under the sun, every other unrelated issue you could possibly think of, that there's always a threat of the need for mental health treatment and services going back on that back burner. That's number one. And number two, I felt, again, for over 13 years now, I'm always living in a state of fear that mental health could become politicized in a partisan way. We're not there yet, but it has to do with the way that both parties at times talk about mental health. I don't want a party to take ownership and make this their issue. I want it to remain nonpartisan, as it should be, because it affects everyone from all walks of life and all political parties. So it should remain nonpartisan.
Yeah, that's really insightful, Michael. Let's talk a little bit about NAMI-Maryland. So for listeners who may not be familiar, can you give us a sense of the organization's mission and how it serves Maryland residents?
Absolutely. So NAMI-Maryland is the state organization of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and it serves as Maryland's voice on mental health, providing education, support, and advocacy. And the mission centers on those three pieces and delivering education, support, and advocacy to people living with mental health conditions, their families and loved ones, and the broader communities in which they live. When I was there as deputy director, what stood out to me most was the grassroots nature of NAMI. That's true nationwide, but certainly true historically and today in Maryland. In Maryland, there's more than 60,000 people on NAMI-Maryland's kind of contact list that are very engaged, not just on the list, but they're engaged with NAMI and working together to reduce stigma around mental illness and promote recovery.
Well, 60,000 members is remarkable. When you say grassroots, what does that look like on the ground?
Well, great question. So to zoom out a bit, the nationwide origins of NAMI it was founded as a grassroots organization and still is known as the nation's largest grassroots mental health organization, and also one of the largest policy and advocacy organizations as well. And the grassroots side of that has to do with engaging individuals to advocate for themselves and to provide programs. I don't want to jump ahead, but I will say that with NAMI programs in Maryland, those are delivered by people who are volunteers and stakeholders. They have some connection to these issues, and they are trained after going through programs themselves. And so on the advocacy side, that's like any other organization's grassroots advocacy. You don't want lobbyists, you want people who are impacted by these issues, who are taking off work to go talk to their legislators and the governor, et cetera. You want those grassroots advocates, and then those are the same people at NAMI that are delivering programs.
Okay, so before we get into specific programs, help us understand the scope here in Maryland. What do the numbers look like?
They are sobering, Mike. Roughly 781,000 adults in Maryland, about 1 in 5, live with a mental health condition, and there's well over 300,000 that likely have a serious mental illness condition as well. During my time at NAMI-Maryland, we emphasized that this touches every community. It is not isolated.
Yeah, 1 in 5 is significant.
It is, and youth mental health is especially concerning. Over a third of middle school students and nearly 40% of high school students report prolonged feelings of sadness or hopelessness.
Well, and I've seen this on the national numbers as well, and it's troubling, especially for our young people.
Yeah, it goes back to what Joey asked, what Nietzsche asked, I guess, about the how and the why. I mean, that is the why. Why do this work? Because of all these people who need help, and NAMI not just tries to help them, but empowers them to help themselves.
Right. That's really sobering. And, when we hear numbers like that, it raises another question, not just about prevalence, but about access and equity. Not everyone has the same resources or transportation or insurance coverage or community support. So how does NAMI work to support individuals and families who may already be facing systemic disadvantages?
So when I was in Kentucky, I set in on one of NAMI's programs, and I'll never forget this. And I've heard it some in Maryland. I'll never forget the first time that I heard it, though, when someone who was leading a program would start off by asking people, and these were families who had a loved one with serious mental illness, asked them, okay, this week, are you in crisis or are you in advocacy? In other words, are you at a place now where we can be talking advocacy and policy, or is your family in a crisis right now, and that is going to be at the forefront of your mind and of our discussion today? So to answer your question directly, it's really the cornerstone of NAMI that anyone involved with NAMI, all are welcome to volunteer and participate, of course, in advocacy side, but in programs that help people with lived experience of mental illness and their families, it's important that they have that shared lived experience, and through working to advocate and educate and support each other, that empowers them.
Okay, Michael, let's talk about some of the services that NAMI provides. What kind of programs does NAMI provide here in the state of Maryland?
It's a broad range of programs. So I mentioned support groups a couple of times. NAMI Connection is a peer-led support group for adults experiencing mental health symptoms. It's confidential, it's welcoming, and grounded in lived experience. NAMI Peer-to-Peer is another program that's a multi-week program focused on recovery skills, understanding diagnoses, treatment options, communication strategies, wellness planning. It's very practical and, once again, empowering. Family support groups take the model of NAMI Connection, but instead of for people that have the mental health condition symptoms, it's for families. And then that is kind of works hand in hand with the 12-week family-to-family course. That is really the bread and butter of how NAMI grew to be where it is today in communities around the country, is this evidence-based family-to-family course that gives the caregivers and anyone with a loved one with mental illness the tools, education, communication strategies, crisis planning, self-care, and not to mention taking the science of mental illness and breaking it down into layman's terms that anyone can understand, which helps you better understand your loved one and what they're going through, and it's transformative for many families.
It sounds like many of these programs are really sort of community supported. Why is there such a focus on peer-based or family-based support programs?
Well, there's three components to what mental illness does to people. There's and to a community. There's the individual who is living with these conditions. There's those close friends and family who love them and want to support them and want to help them and be there for them, but often don't know how, especially when the symptoms first hit. And then it's the broader community. I mean, I don't have to be a close friend or family to know, for example, someone at my church has just experienced first episode psychosis, and now they're in Shepherd Pratt, and they were not planning to be in Shepherd Pratt this week, and neither was their family planning them to be there, or their coworkers, etc. So there's a community element as well. So great question, Mike.
Well, what about outreach beyond these support groups?
So NAMI has programs like Ending the Silence, and that brings mental health education into schools. In Our Own Voice features people sharing their lived experience with mental health conditions to reduce stigma. Those outreach efforts were critical parts of NAMI's statewide impact when I worked there, and they still are today.
Let's talk about reach and sustainability. Are these programs available statewide?
Yes. So NAMI-Maryland works through local affiliates, and those are in the larger, more populated areas. We have this NAMI Metro Baltimore, NAMI Montgomery County, Howard County, Prince George's County. There's also Lower Shore. There's NAMI Frederick to kind of reach a little further west. And I should mention that these programs are also many times are available virtual and in person, just depending on location and who's leading the programs.
And all this is free, right? How is it free?
Donations, grants, community fundraising. It's the 501c3 fundraising hustle. I mean, there are people who do this all day, every day, and I will say at NAMI-Maryland, the people on staff responsible for fundraising and development, that's not their full-time job. They have other responsibilities for NAMI as well. So shout out to Executive Director Stephanie Little and Jeff Pollard, who, again, they have a lot on their plate, including fundraising and development, to keep these programs free.
Okay, so one last question before we close out this session. As a policy advocate, what do you see as the two biggest mental health policy issues that folks should be aware of, and how can they get involved?
Yeah, so two kind of big picture and big ticket items are keeping the funding of mental health services a priority. Why do I say funding? I mean government funding at all levels of government. The most important, the premier policy document of any government, state, local, federal, is their budget legislation. That budget, when it comes out every year, will tell you what does the state government prioritize and what are they deprioritizing. So keeping funding for Medicaid services, for Medicare at the federal level, for policy initiatives to make sure people who are on private insurance or uninsured entirely have some options and somewhere to go for mental health services. Keeping the funding a priority is number one, and it has become more so in the last couple of decades, but keeping that momentum going. And then the other thing is within those priorities, I keep saying mental health services, including all levels of services, from community-based for people who are doing relatively okay but still need therapy or want therapy. They still need some type of medication or group therapy and support groups, from those all the way to intense inpatient psychiatric care. Maryland does not have, like every state, Maryland especially, does not have enough inpatient psychiatric beds, and that's a problem. And that goes back to number one, keeping funding a priority, but also making sure that the continuum of care, all levels of services for all people, meet them where they are with the services they need and want at that time, making sure that's available. So funding number one, and then all levels and types of mental health services.
Well, Michael Gray, thank you for being here and for continuing to advocate for mental health.
Thanks for having me. Joey, Mike, so good to be here. And again, this is very important stuff we're talking about today, and I'm so glad you highlighted it, the topics itself and NAMI-Maryland. Thank you so much.
Right. If someone listening right now needs help, they can visit NAMI-Maryland.org. You can find programs, affiliates, and contact information there. The NAMI helpline is 800-950-6264, and you can text NAMI to 62640. And if someone is in crisis, call or text 988. If you'd like to make a donation, you could do so directly through NAMI's website. We'll also provide the link in the episode description. This has been Cracking the Shell on Psychological Science. Thank you for supporting our Podcasthon charity drive. Until next time, I'm Joey.
And I'm Mike.
Dropping pearls on the mic, Ben with the insights, sharp as a spike. Mike's got the vibe, always keeping it chill. Joey cracks jokes, flexing comedy skills. Four minds collide, the convo's electric. Cracking the shell, peeling layers eclectic. Topics on deck, from the deep to the fun.
Cracking the Shell on Psychological Science is a joint production of Abby Nicholas, Ben Jones, Joey Barnett, and me, Mike Doherty. This episode was part of Podcasthon, and we're grateful to NAMI-Maryland for the work they do every day to support mental health across our state. If today's conversation resonated with you, consider learning more, sharing this episode, or supporting organizations that make mental health care and advocacy possible. If you enjoyed what you heard, help us grow by subscribing and sharing. And if you have thoughts about this episode or want to continue the conversation, you can email us at crackingtheshellonpsychology@gmail.com. That's one long shell-cracking word at gmail.com. Until next time, keep thinking, keep learning, and keep cracking.
From the wild to the wise, it's a balancing act. Brains meet banter, that's a podcast fact. Abby's dropping gems like a treasure chest. Ben dissects